Bus rule. Anyone who remains seated dies. In the dim bus, a strange announcement suddenly sounded and began to loop. Someone stuck their head out and shouted at the driver for a prank. But the next second, a stream of blood suddenly spurted from his neck. A skull slowly rolled to my feet. A black-red fluid splashed on my trouser leg. I opened my eyes wide in terror. Cold sweat crawled up my back. Only when that incredulous face slowly stopped before my eyes did I fully register what had happened. Dead. Worse still, before I could even cry out, a string of screams burst forth one after another. Every pane of glass had been stained a blurred red, as if it had endured a stinging, torrential rain. All the passengers who had been sitting in the bus seats had been wiped out without exception. Only those who had been standing remained, frozen in place. It was just riding a bus. So, why did inexplicable murder rules suddenly appear? Staring at such a bloody scene, my stomach churned, dizziness washed over me, and a wave of nausea followed. My legs went weak, and I nearly collapsed to the ground. Luckily, my two close friends grabbed me just in time, and I finally steadied myself. Jade warned me not to sit down under any circumstances, while Ethan pulled out his phone to call the police. The three of us live close to each other and commute together every day. We'd taken the bus for half a year without incident, so we never imagined we'd run into something so unbelievable today. What made us even more panicked was that after taking out our phones, we discovered none of our devices could receive any signal. It felt as if all contact with the outside world had been severed. A wave of tension spread through me all at once. I clung to the handrail with difficulty and listened to the bus's relentless engine roar, but something felt off, and a question sprang up in my mind. Where's the driver? Why hasn't he stopped after something this serious? But when we walked over, we realized that faced with such a bloody scene, the driver showed no reaction at all. His face was expressionless, as if nothing had happened. He gripped the steering wheel with absolute calm and pressed the accelerator, driving forward. What was even more bizarre was that outside the windshield, it was not the city we knew. All the skyscrapers and vehicles had vanished. There was only a long white road shrouded in dark clouds, with no end in sight. The scene was utterly uncanny. Someone moved as if to attack the driver, but just as they were about to act, the horn sounded again. A hoarse, low voice came slowly. Welcome to Bus Route 0. If you want to live, follow the rules. The bus fell into a deathly silence. Everyone held their breath, straining to hear the eerie bus rules. 1. The vehicle is in motion and will reach a new stop every 10 minutes. Be aware, this bus will not stop at intermediate stops, nor will it open its doors. Anyone who tries to leave on their own will die. 2. At each new stop, a new rule will appear inside the bus and will be announced through the onboard speaker. Listen carefully and obey strictly, or you will die on the spot. 3. Whenever the bus reaches a new stop, the previous rules automatically become void. 4. Rules will not repeat or overlap with one another. 5. It is forbidden to touch or attack the driver in any way. Violators bear the consequences. 6. This route has a total of 7 stops. When the bus arrives at the 7th stop, the rules end. Only those who survive until the end may leave safely. After hearing the rules, the crowd, who had been furious and ready to attack the driver, completely calmed down. Just by looking at the dense stains of blood on the floor, they could tell what fate awaited those who broke the rules. And if we wanted to live, we had to stay on this bus, until we had endured all 6 rules. Looking at the scattered corpses of the passengers all over the ground, I couldn't help but feel deeply worried. What will the rules be next? How many rounds can we actually survive? How many people will make it to the end? Everything was an unknown. Seeing that I kept frowning, Jade next to me patted my shoulder. Don't be too nervous. To stay alive, we must keep calm. Looking at their 2 silhouettes standing beside me, my heart finally settled down quite a bit. After 10 minutes in the dark red enclosure, the familiar arrival chime finally sounded from the speaker. Not only that, the speaker went on to announce the number of deaths with a tone of feigned regret. We regret to inform you that 21 passengers died at the departure station. Original passenger count, 58. Currently alive, 37. After his exclamation, we were presented with the second rule. Bus Rule 2. Starting in 20 seconds, all passengers must grab the handrails and remain suspended. Anyone who touches any other object will die. The second rule was clearly a test of our physical strength and endurance. The handrails hung high and were rough enough to abrade the hands. To remain suspended in midair for a full 10 minutes without using any other support was undoubtedly a long, torturous ordeal, especially for those of us office workers who have long lacked exercise. Fortunately, the rules gave us 20 seconds to prepare, which was barely enough. So I rubbed my wrist and took a careful look at the handrail swaying overhead. I kept rehearsing moves and poses in my head, trying to find the least strenuous way. But just as I was cracking my knuckles, Ethan suddenly changed expression. He hurriedly patted both our backs and urged us to hurry. Climb up quickly, grab one first. Hearing his words, I was momentarily taken aback. But after glancing around the whole carriage, I instantly understood what he meant. Throughout the bus, scattered sparsely, there were only a little more than 20 handrails, and there were as many as 37 living people in the carriage. Not nearly enough. If I didn't grab a nearby handrail soon, I have to try to snatch one from someone else later. Thinking that, I hurriedly reached out and leapt, no longer caring about my posture, and clumsily hooked myself on. In less than 10 seconds, the handrails were successively filled with people. With the deadline fast approaching, the remaining standing passengers could no longer remain calm. They targeted the passengers already hanging, jostling them, tugging at them, even punching and kicking. For a moment, it became utter chaos. Many who had long since secured their spots were literally dragged back down to the floor. The carriage, already a river of blood, had turned into a hell's cape of internecine combat. To avoid being swept up by the crowd, I had no choice but to scramble upward, swinging my legs up as well and winding my body tightly around the overhead bar, tucking the handrail into my arms. Using both hands and feet, I clung like a sloth pressed against a tree trunk. I kept shouting at Ethan and Jade beside me, signaling for them to copy my posture. A man with a crew cut halfway along tried to haul me down, but found the position too high to get any leverage. After a few seconds of struggling, he couldn't shift me. He could only gawk at me hatefully for a moment, make a small click of his tongue, then dive into another cluster of fighters. Although I took several solid blows and my back burned from the impact, I finally breathed a sigh of relief. When the countdown ended, a soft beep beep sounded. I hastily released my legs and kept only my hands on the handrail. When he looked back, the passengers still frantically jostling had all come to a halt. A cold wind suddenly swept through like a gigantic pair of scissors taking its turn to tend to them. Each person's body was cleanly sheared into several pieces according to some rule. They lay scattered on the ground, blood pouring like a river. A dozen or so people were crumpled together in a messy heap, not even forming a single complete human shape. Seeing that, I couldn't help feeling a chill run through me. I tightened my grip on the handrail. The bus lurched a little. To avoid falling to the floor, I crossed my arms over the rail and locked my elbows around it to hold on for dear life. Even though the pain was bone deep, bruises quickly formed. But the increased stability calmed me somewhat. At the same time, everyone in the carriage was straining to hold themselves up, afraid of losing their grip. No one spoke. There was a dead silence. In the aching silence, I grew numb, until I could no longer sense the passage of time. The blurred scenery outside the window only added another layer of intangible pressure. The farther I went, the more acute the exhaustion and pain became. I could only cling on by instinct. Several times I almost let go, but at the last moment, I forced myself to grip harder, desperately preventing a fall. I was about to break down when, at last, the long-missed ding of the stop bell rang again. Third stop arrived. Regrettably, 17 passengers died at the second stop. Currently 20 survivors. When I heard the third rule announced, I finally let go of the burden and collapsed completely to the ground. My body went limp, my hands trembling uncontrollably. Before I knew it, cold sweat had soaked my entire back. But we had only just relaxed for a moment when the third rule crept out of the speaker right after it. Bus Rule 3. All passengers must, within 3 minutes, crawl beneath any seat. Movement is forbidden until the bus reaches its stop. Violate and you die. After hearing this rule, everyone on the bus breathed a sigh of relief. Unlike the previous 2 rounds, which struck without warning, this time they were finally given 3 minutes to prepare. They didn't have to run around like headless flies, risking their lives. Moreover, this task didn't seem to pose any real difficulty. The bus had 21 seats in total, and there were currently 20 survivors in the cabin, so the frantic internal struggle to grab seats would be over. Besides, crawling under a seat to hide was also a lot easier than hanging in midair. Compared to the previous 2 rounds, this one was practically a giveaway. But just as we quietly celebrated, Ethan kept his brow furrowed. After thinking for a long time, he looked at the 2 of us with a solemn face. I can't shake the feeling that this round might hide some other truth. The lights on the bus were dim, and the chill wind made me shiver. Ethan took off his blood-stained glasses and gently wiped them with the hem of his shirt. Jade and I immediately held our breath and turned our gazes toward him. After a moment's thought, Ethan briefly shared his guess. Everyone has already come out of the gates of death twice. You should all know how dangerous the next 2 levels are. If you slip up, you could end up as a corpse on the floor. It's not hard to infer that the rules mostly want to put us to death, while still leaving some chance for a few to survive. But the third trial before us doesn't fit that pattern at all. With over 30 people, we still had to fight fiercely for more than 20 handrails. Now 20 passengers have 21 seats to share. Unless the rules suddenly grew soft and took up charity, I can't think of any reason for this. So I think the key to the third round might lie in the last few words of the rule. Hearing him say that, I couldn't help but replay what the loudspeaker had just read. You're talking about no moving before we reach the stop? That's right. Ethan nodded. I guess that during the upcoming journey, some unexpected things will likely happen that will eliminate certain passengers, even kill them outright. And the list of those eliminated will very likely correspond to the seats they've chosen. Because of the immobility rule, once people pick a seat, they can't change their minds, can't run, and can't resist. They'll just have to watch themselves be eliminated. So, I think the theme of this round's test is probably no longer about fighting over seats, but about how to make a choice. Only those who pick the right seat can continue to survive. If you're unlucky and pick the wrong seat, then you might, from the very beginning, have already fallen into a certain death. After hearing Ethan's hypothesis, we couldn't help but shiver. The slight relaxation I just felt snapped back into urgency in an instant. Looking up and around, I noticed that nearly half the passengers had already picked seats at random and slipped into the lower level. Choosing the right group from the dwindling number of seats had suddenly become a matter of the utmost urgency. In the panic, Ethan hurriedly patted our shoulders. Quick, look everywhere. See if there are any clues. The ceiling, the undersides of the seats, the side windows. In the time that followed, we kept searching for traces of clues. But until only 1 minute remained, we still found nothing. By now, most of the passengers had begun gradually searching for their seats, crawling on the floor, preparing to squeeze into their own spaces. Seeing that every seat looked exactly the same, with no differences to be found, Ethan, inevitably puzzled, put his hand to his forehead. Could it be that I'm just being paranoid? We couldn't help but look at one another, not knowing what danger the rules might conceal. In the end, we could only pick a few vacant seats at random. But just as I was about to crawl beneath the seat, out of the corner of my eye caught sight of the driver up ahead, who had been utterly motionless, the man suddenly letting go of the steering wheel. What is he going to do? Sensing something wrong, I hurriedly clambered out of my seat and, through the reflective glass, saw the driver's profile. He had let go of the wheel and was rummaging by himself in a corner for a heavy hammer, slowly wiping it down. Dark red bloodstains gleamed on the hammer. Though blotchy and indistinct, they gave off a strong metallic tang of blood. And on his lifeless, sullen face For the first time, a strange smile tugged at the corners. Watching that odd movement of his, I couldn't help but glance back at the fragile plastic seats. Suddenly, it seemed clear. The purpose of this rule. My God! With only half a minute left, I didn't even have time to stand up. I scrambled urgently toward Ethan and Jade a short distance away. They were both completely curled up under their seats by then. Seeing me in a panic, they both looked at me with startled expressions. I didn't have time to explain much. I could only hurry and pull them out. Hurry, run to the back. The farther from the driver, the better. Although the two of them were baffled, they still followed swiftly behind me. It took us only a few steps to reach the last row of the carriage. Unfortunately, every seat nearby was already taken. Only a single spot remained. Watching the countdown about to finish, I couldn't help but draw in a cold breath. There aren't enough seats. What do we do? Ethan pinched the bridge of his nose, hesitated for a moment, and replied, "Let's squeeze in together." I hadn't expected that answer. After all, up until now, everyone had implicitly followed the one-person, one-seat rule. Ethan waved us through as he explained, "The rules don't forbid making the same choice, and there's nothing like in the second round that bans touching others. As long as you can make sure there's only one seat above your head, you shouldn't be eliminated." Soon after, with Ethan's help, Jade and I were stuffed under the same seat. Though cramped and aching all over, at least we were fully tucked in. Ethan himself quickly ducked into the gap beside us, squeezed in with a stranger. Luckily, the other person was fairly mild-mannered and didn't object. Instead, they curled in a little, giving him half their space. At the same time, the 3-minute countdown also happened to end. Everyone held their breath, silently waiting for the trial of the checkpoint. The engine's roar continued as before, and the ever-silent driver suddenly stood up from the driver's seat. He held a huge iron hammer and slowly turned around. He grinned viciously as he walked toward the nearest seat. Without any further words, he swung the hammer up and brought it down hard. Blow after blow. From my angle, I couldn't see where it struck. I could only hear the clear, brittle snap of bones and the unceasing, terrible wails. As the driver's movements grew more violent, I could hardly imagine what that passenger would turn into. Fear swept through my mind, making me tremble uncontrollably. It wasn't until the first passenger fell completely silent that the driver finally stopped. He walked to the next seat. One hammer, then another. It wasn't until now that people finally understood what kind of hell this seemingly simple third round really was. Faced with such a suffocating scene, it didn't take long before some couldn't bear it and tried to climb out of their seats and flee toward the back. But those who had wriggled out early were, without exception, dragged back by the driver and forcefully kicked into their original places. There was no other option but to watch helplessly as they were hammered to death. I never could have imagined, not even in my wildest dreams, that 10 minutes could feel so unbearably long. Fourth stop arrived. Regrettably, 13 passengers died at the previous stop. Currently 7 survivors. By the time I crawled out from beneath the seat, my body was already nearly numb. It wasn't just the pain of holding a posture, but the relentless fear. The driver went from nearest to farthest, beating every passenger hiding beneath the seats, moving on to the next target only after each one stopped breathing. The cycle repeated over and over. Only when the bell rang did he finally walk back to the driver's seat in silence, resuming his dazed expression and taking the wheel again, as if nothing had ever happened. Only blurred flesh remained in the carriage, the acrid stench of blood hanging in the air. And the seats where the 3 of us had been sitting had already been smashed to pieces, plastic shards scattered across the floor. It was clear that if we hadn't switched places, by now they had probably been reduced to little more than mangled lumps of flesh. It was truly a miracle to have survived. After me, Jade and Ethan also crawled out from under the seats in a shameful scramble. Seeing the hellish scene before them, their faces were equally written with horror. For a long time, we couldn't calm down. But after only a few simple seconds of rest, the loudspeaker couldn't wait and sounded again. It seemed unwilling to give us much chance to catch our breath, and began announcing a new rule. "Congratulations, everyone, you are past the halfway point. Bus Rule 4. The upcoming stretch is more complex. Every 30 seconds, the driver will randomly select a passenger to confirm the direction at the next intersection. Please choose left or right. Those who choose incorrectly will die on the spot. If 3 mistakes accumulate, the driver will completely lose direction and the entire bus will die. Please answer carefully. After a few sizzling electrical sounds, the speaker fell completely silent. The carriage instantly plunged into silence. Everyone was quietly working through that rule in their minds, both complicated and simple. Although the speaker had said a lot, it all boiled down to one sentence. Choose left or right. Every 30 seconds, the driver would randomly pick a passenger and tell them to choose whether to turn left or turn right. Choose wrong, and you'll lose your life. Not only that, but there was an even more shocking additional condition. 3 wrong choices in total, and the whole bus dies together. In other words, everyone not only had to think about their own answer, but also closely watch what others were doing. It should be noted that outside our windows, there was nothing but thick fog, a chaotic whiteout. You couldn't see where any road might be. To try to judge which way to go, you were almost forced to rely on guessing. And between each 2 stops, the vehicle took a full 10 minutes to travel. So throughout the entire 4th stage, the driver would ask us roughly 20 questions. To safely move on to the next stage, the 7 of us were allowed to be wrong at most twice. That level of difficulty was almost harder than climbing into the sky. Ethan stood beside me, pushing his already crooked glasses back into place, and couldn't help but sigh. From a probabilistic standpoint, it's almost impossible for any of us to make it to the next level. The other passengers, many of whom had seen Ethan's meticulous analyses before, now saw him sink into pessimism, and a chorus of despair rose among them. There was no clue to be found. What made things worse, before we had even fully calmed down, the driver had already started the first round of questions. The next intersection is approaching. Passenger Ryan, please make your choice within 20 seconds. At those words, a boy in the crowd with a buzz cut suddenly flinched. Clearly, he was the Ryan who had been called. After being chosen, he hurriedly pressed his face to the window, trying to catch any information from outside. But all he could see was an endless expanse, without any distinguishing features or signs to tell direction. In the stifling carriage, time passed with dizzying speed. You have 5 seconds left or right? The driver's urging sounded like a deathly curse. Ryan clenched his fists, hesitated for a moment, then grit his teeth and could only blurt out a guess. Left, I guess. At that, the driver silently shook his head. He slammed the wheel and veered to the left. The speaker crackled and hissed. Wrong choice. Current total number of errors, 1. Before the words finished, a huge blood-red arm smashed the glass and lunged in through the left window. He grabbed the panicked Ryan, clamping his fist shut with force. When he opened his hand again, the figure inside had already shattered with a roar. The first choice had failed just like that. Worse still, the rest of us gained no useful clues. Why did choosing the left fail? How could one tell to go to the right? We have no way of knowing. And the driver, who had only just been driving steadily in a straight line for 10 seconds, spoke up once again. The next stop is approaching. Passenger Samuel, please make your choice within 20 seconds. At those words, the passenger closest to us was instantly struck with terror. He was the stranger who had just given half of his seat to Ethan. A feeling of despair swept over him in an instant. Samuel made no attempt to assess the situation, but turned to Ethan and me with a pleading look. Perhaps it was because of our performance in the previous round that he saw us as a lifeline. Unfortunately, we had no idea about the answers either. Ethan kept rubbing his temples. A few flecks of guilt flickered in his eyes, but all he could do was sigh helplessly. Sorry, I don't have a clue either. Under the driver's habitual urging, Samuel could only give up struggling entirely and, by instinct, chose the right side opposite Ryan. The driver still shook his head indifferently. The horn sounded again. Wrong choice. Current total error count, 2. A blood-red giant hand appeared again, shattering the right side window and clamping down violently on Samuel's body. This time it yanked him out of the window alive. Only a heart-wrenching wail was left behind. The bus grew increasingly stifling. No one had expected that 2 rounds of answers would exhaust all the allowed failures. What awaited us were still a full dozen or so more questions. From now on, we could not get a single one wrong. Otherwise, all 5 of us would be buried here. Many people might not even get the chance to answer. They would have to leave their fate in the hands of others. The oppressive atmosphere made the already cramped bus feel even more suffocating. In the tense air, the driver began the 3rd round of questions. Next intersection approaching. Passenger Adrian, please make your choice within 20 seconds. Upon hearing that, I couldn't help but freeze for a moment. Because Adrian is my name, I hadn't expected that this crucial life or death choice would be handed to me. Cold sweat suddenly slid down my forehead. I kept taking deep breaths, trying to calm myself and think things through carefully, but I still couldn't find any solution. Don't talk about judging the intersection. I can't even see the road. How am I supposed to know whether to go left or right? Faced with such an insoluble problem, I could only, like the 2 people ahead of me, make a rough guess in my head. If the time ran out and I still hadn't found the answer, I'd just have to make a random stab in the dark. Luckily, just as I was about to give up struggling, Jade, who had been silent the whole time, suddenly spoke. She pointed at the shattered glass on both sides of the carriage. Don't rush, I have an idea. I was about to ask what kind of idea it was. But Jade, having finished speaking, quickly climbed onto the right windowsill. She stuck her head out, as if searching for something. Perhaps because her view was limited, she clicked her tongue once, and then went so far as to lean her whole body out the window, pressing herself against the outside of the bus, only her toes still hooked on the sill. After 2 or 3 seconds, she leapt back into the carriage. She said nothing, ran to the left side of the carriage, climbed onto the windowsill, and imitated the same method. When everything was done, she gently patted my back. Turn right. Hearing the firmness in her voice, I, too, chose to believe without hesitation. She didn't wait for the countdown to wind down. She simply turned to the driver and gave the answer. Turn right. This time the driver finally stopped shaking his head. Instead, he said, Roger, and prepared for a left turn ahead. Meanwhile, the horn sounded again. Choice correct. Current total error count, 2. Watching the driver slowly turn the steering wheel, I finally let out a long sigh of relief. We are, for the moment, safe. So how did you determine the direction? After the 3rd round of choices ended, I couldn't help but look at Jade in shock. She relaxed as well, smiling faintly as she explained. Just now I noticed that the blood-red arm used for punishment had reached in from the wrong direction both times. Both panes of glass happened to be broken, so I simply climbed out to see where that blood-red arm was positioned and whether it had any connection to the answer. The first time I climbed out, it was through the right window, and I didn't find anything. So I climbed up to the left window again, and sure enough, when my head poked onto the roof, I saw a blurred shadow of a hand crouched on the edge of the roof, facing me head-on. So I guess that left was most likely the wrong answer. It was waiting here in advance, precisely to make it easy to kill anyone who chose left. So I told you to turn right, a direction opposite to it. We talked as the driver announced the 4th round of names. This time, it was Ethan's turn to choose the direction. Jade once again slipped out through the left window, skillfully clinging to the outside of the bus. The bloody hand is still on the left. Keep turning right. Ethan nodded and told the driver the answer. The horn hissed. Choice correct. Current total error count, 2. Watching Jade flip up and down now, Ethan and I both had our eyes full of stars. ZU, you're practically a superhero. 5th stop arrived. Regrettably, at the previous stop, 2 seated passengers died. Currently 5 alive. 10 minutes later, the bus arrived at the stop without incident. We passed this round thanks to Jade's godlike performance. Every choice we made afterward was steady and correct. She hung by the window like a swallow, effortlessly watching over the bloodied hand for us. I have to say, Jade's agility was truly remarkable. When it was her turn to be called down by the driver, Ethan and I together fumbled for a long time before we could finally, barely, see the condition of the roof. Even so, she was still trembling. With one careless move, she almost fell straight off the car and down to the ground, eliminated on the spot. It's hard to imagine how she managed to do that so effortlessly all on her own. Even knowing she'd trained in many sports since childhood, we still couldn't make sense of it. The fourth stage was supposed to be fairly late in the sequence, yet the process was much easier than the earlier stages. But we didn't have time to feel happy about passing. Only a few seconds later, a new rule, announced through the horn static, was already thrust into our faces. Congratulations to everyone. You have successfully passed. Bus Rule 5. Please all move to the front of the carriage, near the driver's area. Hearing the voice from the speaker, I couldn't help but feel a little puzzled. The rule for the fifth stage is this simple. Walking up near the front of the bus. How hard could that be? Still, saying and doing are different. So we hurriedly followed the instruction and soon all stood by the driver's area at the very front. Unexpectedly, after the 5 of us were in position, the horn blared again. It announced the second half of the rules. Next, the middle of the carriage will be split in two, carved into 2 corridors leading to the rear. Passengers, please choose one of them and proceed carefully toward the end of the carriage. After 5 minutes, anyone who has not reached the destination will die. No sooner had the voice fallen than a blinding white light flared, plunging us into a brief blindness. After a few seconds, I could barely make out the scene before me. The bus interior that had just been full of seat fragments and shattered bodies had somehow become 2 narrow corridors, one to the left and one to the right. The outer walls of the corridors were made entirely of glass, and we could see everything inside with perfect clarity. The corridor on the left was extremely perilous. Its floor appeared to have been hollowed out, leaving only a thin wooden pole suspended in midair leading to the far end. Dozens of blades were mounted on the wall, some high, some low, swinging back and forth, continuously attacking above the wooden pole. In other words, to get past here, you not only had to walk the single-plank bridge, but also had to face an interception of knife blades and sword flashes. The corridor to the right was much quieter. At first glance, there was nothing unusual. There wasn't just solid flooring. There were no treacherous mechanisms anywhere either. It was as if the word safety had been written on the wall. But thinking back to the life and death trials of the previous stages, I couldn't possibly treat the right side as a true safe zone. Places that appear calm and peaceful always hide even more insidious tricks. 5 minutes, not too little, not too much. Although the corridor was short, only 7 or 8 strides to cross, figuring out the right path was undoubtedly time-consuming. After racking my brain with no success, I turned my gaze to Ethan and Jay beside me. Do you two have any ideas? Both of them shook their heads. It was obvious the rules wanted to see us choose the safe path on the right, and then we would likely find that the risks inside were actually greater and more terrifying than on the left. But you can't, just because of that kind of guesswork, truly run off to the left to climb a mountain of blades, can you? Even the most agile Jade couldn't possibly walk such a narrow plank and dodge a dozen blades. The real way out must lie elsewhere. But while the 3 of us stared around, the remaining 2 passengers produced something unexpected. A middle-aged man with slightly graying hair emerged. He hesitated for a moment, then headed straight for the empty corridor on the right. Everyone, I think you may be overcomplicating things. The moment those words left his mouth, we all turned our gazes to him. He smiled calmly, one foot already stepping into the corridor. In fact, the previous challenges, summed up, are very simple. This so-called rule is nothing more than a way to eliminate the majority while always leaving a sliver of hope for a few. You've all fallen into a mental rut, always looking for some secret inside. In fact, you might precisely be missing the truth. Is it possible that there aren't any unknown traps in these 2 corridors at all, and it's just a simple distribution problem? Judging by how things have gone so far, it's likely that this life gate will allow at most 1 or 2 people through before it closes, and the rest will have no choice but to grit their teeth and take the left path to death. Think about it for a moment. Doesn't this feel a lot like the pattern from the first 3 rounds? The cramped carriage lay empty, the uncle's voice echoing in our ears without cease. The four of us fell into a brief silence. We kept turning over the possibility of what he had said in our minds. But the uncle clearly didn't want to waste any more time. He didn't wait for us to think or discuss. After finishing his explanation, he quickly nodded to us and was the first to step into the corridor on the right. Left us with a hurried silhouette of his back. Seats are definitely limited. I won't wait. I'll go on ahead. But no sooner had the words fallen than a flicker of silver light suddenly burst from his body. In an instant, it sliced through his flesh. A strong metallic stench burst out instantly, assaulting our senses. The uncle who had been brimming with confidence just moments ago, within the span of merely 3 or 4 seconds, on that seemingly calm corridor, was ripped to pieces. There are invisible blades in the corridor on the right. Ethan drew a long, cold breath and gently adjusted his bent eyeglass frame. Jade's gaze was equally grave. By now the glass exterior wall of the corridor had taken on a red tint, as if telling us of the danger and horror lurking in the 2 passages. The uncle had risked his life to help us figure out the mechanics of this stage. Before us lay 2 paths. One was a narrow log bridge studded with visibly discernible blades and traps. The other was level ground concealing blades and traps completely invisible to the eye. The former was extremely difficult. The latter was impossible to avoid. There was no way out at all. There were simply 2 roads that led to certain death. Unconsciously, everyone's breathing grew rapid. A thick atmosphere of despair hung over each of them. Seeing that time was nearly halfway gone, the last unfamiliar female passenger completely broke down. Her face went deathly pale, and feeling there was nothing left to live for, she staggered over to the right. 3 of you. The path on the left is just too hard. Those thin wooden poles, I can't even get across them under normal circumstances, let alone with blades to deal with. If you want to get through smoothly, your only chance is to try your luck on the right. If you run fast enough, you might just be able to narrowly avoid the blade's path. After speaking, she drew a final deep breath, closed her eyes, and dashed out at top speed. Unfortunately, having only taken 2 or 3 steps, she was torn apart into splashes of blood with a horrific cry. When the silver light flickered, we could vaguely see that the density and speed of the invisible blades on the right were in no way inferior to those on the left. And they were deadly sharp. In the blink of an eye, only 2 minutes remained. By now, on the bus, every passenger except the 3 of us had already died. The cruel rules had turned this not-quite-spacious carriage into a human purgatory. And us? We figured this was probably where our journey would end. After all, the 2 passengers ahead of us had already proven with their lives how hard this stage was. To face an invisible blade head-on was almost the same as walking into death. As for the other side, it was even more obviously like a mountain of blades and a sea of fire in its difficulty. Thinking of this, I couldn't help but feel a bit disheartened. He shuffled a few steps back and, stumbling, leaned against the wall. I've held on this long. Am I still going to die? They say in any contest, the runner-up is the greatest loser. Now, what are we, if not the biggest losers in this deadly game? If I could just endure one more stop, I might have a chance to see the terminus. But sadly, no matter how long I watched, I simply couldn't find any way to reach the opposite side. Facing an impasse like a dead end, I couldn't help but let out a long sigh. But just as the wave of despair was about to overwhelm my mind, Ethan suddenly stood up from the hallway doorway. I think I've found a pattern. After saying that, he immediately turned to look at us. A flash of dazzling light reflected off his glasses. What pattern? No sooner had Ethan finished speaking than Jade, and I hurried over. His words just now were like someone tossing a lifeline into the midst of despair. They rekindled my will to survive. Ethan quickly took off his coat, balled it up, and hurled it down the right corridor. I still need to run a few more experiments to verify whether my idea is correct. The moment the bundle of clothing was thrown into the corridor, it was shredded by an invisible blade. White fluff scattered all over the floor. Ethan frowned deeply, as if pondering something, then reached back and said, "Give me your coats too." Although we didn't understand what he was doing, we hurriedly took off our coats and handed them to him. He repeated the same procedure, throwing all our coats in as well. The result was exactly the same as before. The coat couldn't be thrown very far at all. It was quickly intercepted by the blades and torn to pieces. Facing a scene like that, Jade and I were both baffled. But after the third experiment ended, Ethan's perpetually furrowed brow strangely began to relax. As I thought, exactly the same as I guessed. Not only that, he even simply smiled. It seems like we might make it. Hearing Ethan say that, we immediately perked up. A surge of excitement rose in my chest as I couldn't help but look at him, wanting to know why. Ethan raised his hand and pointed to the corridor on the left. When those two were rushing through, you probably were all staring only at the right side corridor where they were and didn't pay attention to this left side. But I was watching both corridors at the same time. It was because of that I noticed a detail. Every time the invisible blade on the right touched an object and made a cutting wound, the blade on the left just happened to have moved to approximately the same position. The subsequent experiments completely confirmed my idea. In other words, the two corridors actually used exactly the same blade assemblies and had exactly the same motion trajectories. The only difference was whether the blades were visible or invisible. This is precisely why the outer walls of the corridor are made entirely of transparent glass. When we walk in the right-hand corridor, we can directly observe the position of the blades on the left and avoid them. That way, we neither have to cross the dangerous narrow plank nor face those so-called invisible blades. Jade and I finally understood. Simply choosing left or right was a guaranteed path to death. The core of this level, it turned out, was to use the left hallway as a reference and dodge the blade strikes coming from the right. Stare at the left, but walk on the right. You don't need to climb that razor-thin footbridge. You just have to fix your eyes on the blade's trajectories, and you'll get through unharmed. At this moment, the tense atmosphere finally dissipated like smoke. Jade and I both breathed a sigh of relief. The stone in our hearts was finally put down for good. In the last minute, we reminded one another and took turns passing through the right-hand corridor. We made it back to the rear of the carriage safely. Although the process was still somewhat perilous, Ethan, out of practice and unused to physical exertion, even after watching the blade's sliding path clearly, still got lightly grazed and had several layers of skin scraped off. He walked in a very sorry state. But at last the three of us all made it through the fifth round alive. By the time the horn sounded again, we were nearly spent, collapsed onto the seats in the last row. Sixth stop arrived. Regrettably, at the previous stop, 2 seated passengers died. Currently 3 people alive. Please note, we will soon arrive at Station 7, which is also the terminus for Route 0. There will be no more tests during the journey. Please carefully observe your surroundings, memorize the nearby situation, and be sure to take note of all landmarks and information within your view to find the final escape location. Bus Rule 6. After the vehicle arrives, several passengers must get off. Those who reach the escape location within 10 minutes will survive. Failures will die. After listening to the announcement on the loudspeaker, we immediately stood up. Not daring to show any laxity, each of us took a direction and pressed ourselves to the windows, staring intently outside. Jade, blunt as ever like during the earlier challenge, simply climbed through the broken panes and lay outside the window. But as time slowly passed, I was dumbfounded. The murky haze all around never lifted for an instant. Don't talk about landmarks. I couldn't even make out the road beneath my feet. I didn't even know at any point what kind of place this bus was driving through. To try to get some information, I went up to the driver and grilled him for a long time. He still wore that same dead fish expression and didn't reply to a single word I said. Watching 10 minutes quietly slip away like that, a fresh flicker of panic inevitably rose in my chest. I couldn't find any of the clues mentioned in the rules. What's more, with only the last minute of the journey left, we simply bumped heads briefly, and the two of them were just the same as me. Hardly any gain at all. Even Jade, who had the best vision, couldn't make out anything a meter away. This miserable condition persisted until the 10 minutes were completely over. The stop bell chimed softly. The driver finally brought the bus to a halt and opened the door. "Everyone, we've arrived." Get off, I'm finishing my shift. At the driver's urging, the three of us disembarked in a daze. Unexpectedly, even after getting off the bus, we still didn't see the normal world. Before us stood row after row of skyscrapers, all exactly the same height, each wrapped in a heavy, drifting fog, faintly visible. And the highway beneath our feet was exactly the same. No traffic signs to be found, nor any indication of a route. Moreover, all around us, front, back, left, and right, was like a vast chessboard peppered with countless intersections. Each intersection connected to the others in a complex web, spreading in every direction. No matter how far we walked, we couldn't see an end. It was nothing short of a maze. We wandered aimlessly through such a place, not a single figure in sight, let alone the elusive escape destination mentioned in the rules. In a world so monotonously uniform, where on earth was one supposed to look for any signpost? This time even Ethan, usually so composed, had completely lost heart. During the last 10 minutes of the bus's journey, the three of us found no clues at all. It was almost like walking out of the exam hall with a blank paper. No information, no hints, not even a single point of reference could be found. Even Ethan, acknowledged within our circle as the top student, no longer had the courage to continue answering. You can't just pick a random building from these seemingly endless towers and try anything in desperation, can you? We walked farther and farther and grew more and more lost. Several times we tried changing direction, yet we still couldn't escape this strange forest of steel. With only 3 minutes of time left and our strength mostly spent, we found a street corner and half collapsed there. At the final moment of our lives, we wanted, together, to look up at the sky. It turned out, unexpectedly, that the fog was so thick here we couldn't even tell what the weather was like outside. I couldn't help but shake my head with a bitter smile. But just as I helplessly looked around, a strange thought suddenly slipped into my mind. With a hint of puzzlement, I turned to look at Jade and Ethan beside me. Wait, the rules never actually said that the so-called landmark had to be outside the bus, did they? The two stared at me, dumbfounded. What? I'm not sure either. It just occurred to me a moment ago. We've been walking for a very, very long time. Around here, forget about landmarks. Almost everything looks the same. So I've been thinking about something. Maybe there aren't any landmarks here at all. The only thing in this world that's actually different isn't anything fixed. It's the bus we came on. If anything can be called a landmark, it seems like only that would qualify. How about we make a bet and go back the way we came? After saying that, I looked at the two of them with a completely serious face. To my surprise, they had somehow already stood up and were both looking at me, who was still half reclining. Then what are you still lying there for? Get going. After sprinting for a little over 2 minutes, we made it back to the drop-off point with just over 10 seconds left on the countdown. As expected, although the driver said he was done for the day, he had actually never moved. He stood with the bus doors open, silently waiting. He hadn't left at all. With almost no hesitation, we climbed back onto the bus. Unexpectedly, when we went out and came back, the bus interior had become unnaturally tidy. The chaotic, gruesome bloodstains and dismembered bodies had all vanished, leaving the bus looking almost no different from an ordinary one before the incident. As the three of us got on, the horn immediately blared. Please take a seat and hold tight. Welcome back to Route Zero. The driver shut the door without ceremony, gripped the wheel, and started the engine. We continued driving through the fog without stopping. After about 2 minutes of silence, a voice came through the horn, entirely different from before, cadenced like a broadcaster on the radio, delivering news. Next is a bulletin from our city. This morning at 8:42, a major traffic accident occurred in the city. A bus carrying 58 passengers suddenly lost control, crashed into a guardrail, and then caused a violent explosion. 21 passengers died at the scene, 34 passengers were resuscitated unsuccessfully and died, and 3 passengers are still undergoing emergency treatment. The exact cause of the explosion is still under investigation by the Special Task Force. The news grew quieter and quieter as it went on, but we still sensed some wrongness in that odd piece of news. 8:42 a.m., bus, accident explosion, 58 passengers, 21 dead at the scene, 34 deaths despite resuscitation, 3 still under resuscitation. Those words and numbers carried an inexplicable feeling of déjà vu. When the report finally ended, that familiar voice reappeared through the loudspeaker. He smiled and said, "That's right, the bus you were on is the same one that made the news. Let me introduce myself. I'm a messenger from the lower realm, in charge of ferrying the departed down there. But we have a rule. Those who die in accidents may take part in a single, extremely difficult trial. Those who fail will come with me to the lower realm. Only a very small fraction of those who pass the test are granted the right to return to the living. The survivors from this batch are the 3 of you. Under each of your seats, there is a non-disclosure agreement. After you return to the living world, you must keep everything about the underworld confidential." Hearing this, I hurriedly reached under the seat and, sure enough, found a thin sheet of white paper tucked in the compartment. Some simple terms were written above. The driver brought over 3 pens and urged us to sign our names quickly. After we signed, the voice from the loudspeaker continued. "Those of you who wake up may still be seriously injured, but trust me, that's certainly much better than death. In any case, you'll be spared. The return trip will take about 2 hours. Please do not move around. Remain seated and wait. Next stop, the world of the living. Congratulations to the 3 of you. You've escaped with your lives." The end.